Hello, everybody. In the wake of the Trump inauguration, it seems as if literally and metaphorically, Silicon Valley has arrived in Washington, D.C. Lots of iconic photos of Jeff Bezos and his new wife, Elon Musk, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. Everyone showed up, even the CEO of TikTok, which is supposed to be banned, Tim Cook from the old Silicon Valley Guard. And of course, the ubiquitous Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, lots of other media figures there. Joe Rogan, the most popular podcaster, and old media was represented too in the form of Rupert Murdoch, the CEO, I think still, or at least the chairman of News Corp. So what does this tell us about this new world of perhaps technology capitalism or Trumpian technology? Musk, of course, is the main symbolic figure. My guest today on the show has an interesting new book out, timed perfectly, Against Platforms, Surviving Digital Utopia by Mike Pepi. Mike is joining us from Queens in New York. Mike, have we arrived in digital utopia in the wake of the Trump inauguration?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends on who you ask. I mean, the first thing I think about digital utopia is that it's always in the future, right? It's never quite achieved, right? It's an engine to get you to keep on moving. It's something that you will never, quite reach. Some people would say we're in a bit of a digital dystopia, depending on your opinions of the current president. But yeah, I would say that this is potentially one of the initial plans behind a lot of the thinking coming out of Silicon Valley is to align themselves with power and to basically break away any kind of bottleneck or regulatory guard to build what they want, to build their utopia.
In a review of your new book in Rolling Stone, the title is How Tech Billionaires Screwed Us All. But of course, everybody uses Facebook and Apple and WhatsApp. And so how are they screwing us, Mike?
Yeah, well, that headline is certainly adventurous. I didn't quite write that, but I would say one of the ways I think we'll see unfold right now is they are, and a lot of this remains to be seen, but I'll say the first thing they're doing is they're going to tear down a lot of regulations, specifically around AI. They're going to clear the way for energy production to help feed a lot of this work that they've sort of wanted to do on AI. I would say in a lot of ways they're going to crack down on some of the protections that had been put in place over the past few administrations around how we interface with platforms. So I think that's one way in which I think we'll see the power that was already quite entrenched potentially have a new ally in the federal government.
Your book is called Against Platforms, and of course, Bezos founded Amazon. I guess that's a platform. Zuckerberg is clearly the owner of lots of different platforms, from Instagram to Facebook. TikTok is a social media platform. I guess Apple has a platform, although it works with other platforms. OpenAI is a wannabe platform. I'm not sure Joe Rogan's podcast is a platform. And of course, Rupert Murdoch owned an analog platform. So what for you does a platform mean? And is there something unique about the digital platforms of Instagram and Facebook and OpenAI and Google?
Yeah, I mean, platform, as you mentioned, can be technically agnostic, right? You give someone a platform, some media properties, some publications sort of have a platform essence to them. But I think the thing that separates, the way that Silicon Valley kind of evolved over the past, several decades is kind of the most low risk, most high advantageous piece of sort of software apparatus to build is the platform. And as you mentioned, like this could be social media platforms for communication, for journalism, for sharing data and media. But it can also be very like real world platforms, basically the platformization of retail, which is essentially what Amazon did. You can you can take platform logic and apply it to something like transportation and hailing a cab. I think really what happens is it does have a lot to do with the affordances, sometimes utopian, of social media and digital media. But the direction that kind of took over the past 20 years was to build these megastructures that are essentially asynchronous data layers over any kind of human activity, right? I think they kind of distinguish themselves from old platforms, and they also distinguish themselves from the things that they replaced in a few important ways. I think the biggest one is they sort of don't quite care what you're consuming. They don't make plans. It's more like you can go on a platform and make a plan yourself, as long as you trade out that hosting fee, that control, and that data. They're asynchronous, right? They want as many things to be uploaded at once. They want to reduce waiting. They want to reduce any kind of time or labor that is uploaded to that platform. And I think, this remains to be seen, but I think in a lot of ways, they don't quite care what you upload. They're agnostic to the sort of ends that you create on these platforms, as long as they have the means, as long as they can mediate that transaction. And of course, the most important thing is they have to scale. So platforms is very much the venture capital darling because it's the cheapest, most cost efficient, lowest risk way to sort of scale a business. And I think that's why you see a lot of platforms today doing anything they can to make sure that they grow and scale, and that's essentially this growth at all costs kind of mentality that we're now witnessing.
Musk, of course, is most closely associated now with Trump. He's become the bad boy in many people's minds. Is Tesla a platform, or is it a wannabe platform?
Absolutely. I think it's a really important distinction to bring up. So Tesla is doing to driving what potentially, Amazon or any other type of platform is doing to your shopping. Tesla, people forget about Tesla is you can't just like go out on your own without Tesla knowing where you are. You can't use a non-Tesla approved charging station. I believe still to this day, although there's
I think that's right. I used to have a Tesla.
Oh yeah. They are it plugs into this larger ecosystem that of course Tesla owns, right? So it's an interesting metaphor here, right? Like the technology of the car would be building a car, operating a car. You can use it anytime you want. It doesn't have to be interoperable with this sort of technology platform. Tesla can only go on this sort of essentially, you can only use Tesla charging stations, and you sort of always know where a Tesla is based on its surveillance technology. And another weird, creepy thing about Tesla is like it's always tracking and filming you, and that, of course, that data belongs to Tesla. So there's a lot of ways in which they actually operationalize this platform logic on, essentially the basic act of mobility and driving.
Altman, of course, is the latest Silicon Valley darling of investors. He's working supposedly with Trump and Larry Ellison on an initiative in the government. Is OpenAI the latest version of a wannabe platform?
Absolutely. I think it clearly wants to be a platform where, much a little bit like iOS, they kind of want to have they've launched an app store, I believe. They clearly want this to be something that people use. They want to replace Google search. They want to replace any kind of cognitive work. I would say that they're going to probably look to replace sort of how we use Windows today, right? It's potentially there's a whole operating system with the OpenAI model LLM as the underlying basis for that. Most importantly, though, I think a little bit orthogonal to your question is OpenAI only exists because we have been uploading everything to digital platforms for the past 20 odd years, right? If they didn't have that platform training data, their models would be a lot less powerful.
Mike, a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, this is all very well, but Tim Cook is very much concerned with minority rights. He's given a lot of money away. Apple seems a reasonable company. We're not scared of they are as Facebook. Sam Altman is another progressive. Does it make any difference in political terms who runs the platform? In other words, whether it's Musk, who some people now believe is a card-carrying Nazi, or Tim Cook, or Sam Altman, or Jeff Bezos, are they all, in a sense, prisoners of the ideology of the platform?
Yes, I believe they are. I think the last thing a platform wants to do is hinder its growth by taking a sort of judgmental political opinion or alienating any one of its users, or even openly favoring or influencing anything that gets put on there or is built on there. Right? These folks probably all have political ideologies. That's fine. But I think when they clock into work every day, and they build, they basically answer to, I would say, something that is an ideology of computation for computation's sake, right? They have to grow, they have to create value, and they're willing to make political compromises along the way to achieve that.
So, in other words, the fact that Cook, who one wouldn't really expect to be at Trump's inauguration, or Zuckerberg, who threw Trump off Facebook back in 2020 or whenever it was. What they think privately, politically, doesn't really matter. They themselves are prisoners of the platform. Platforms have a kind of life of their own, almost.
Yeah, I would say exactly that. I mean, I still think it's interesting, the strange bedfellows that are being made, and a lot of people
literally. I hope not, Mike. I hope we don't see Donald Trump and maybe Jeff Bezos' wife, but certainly not Bezos, in bed together.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of hay is being made about that right now. I think there is somewhat of a political realignment. And look, I mean, I know you know this well. Like this federal government, Silicon Valley revolving door has been happening for a long time. So it's not like this is new. I think it's just shocking to a lot of people for the somewhat odd pairing you're seeing now. But I think these platforms realize that there is potentially a cultural shift happening now. But more importantly, they need to make sure they're allied with power, and they need to make sure that they're growing. I don't think they really, do have that kind of underlying institutional political commitment that you might get from something else.
Is there a superstructural quality to your thinking here? I mean, can one do a startup? I know you're a veteran of the startup world. TikTok is vulnerable to this, of course, although they're caught in the crosshairs of Chinese and American platforms. Can one do a startup these days without wanting to be a platform? One of the ideals, at least, of the Web3 movement, which seems to have fizzled recently, is to be what you might think of as an anti-platform startup. But is that delusionary?
Yeah, I think there are many startups today, many even I would call them just basically projects that utilize new innovative technology that start out with lofty goals, or sort of this kind of do-gooder, change the world atmosphere. Like, we all have a little bit of that in us, right? It was a pretty strong ideology there for a while. But I think what happens is once you
Speak
start
for yourself,
to
Mike. No,
yes,
I'm joking.
well, I know. Once you, I believe there's a kind of point in the book around this problem where once you take on kind of venture capital, or once you essentially try to have a board, or you have users that need things, we've seen over and over again how sometimes these utopian aims have to come back down to earth, right? I think that's exactly what happened with Web3, right? There were a lot of people trying to think about how to insert blockchain into various different problems. But I think we saw very quickly how blockchain went from maybe a libertarian decentralization, power to the people movement, to essentially kind of just becoming another platform. At least that's what happened in the sort of NFT world and the art world. It turns out people don't really want to be these tinkerers. They don't want to be these digital revolutionaries. They actually just want a simple service. And I think for mostly worse, the quickest way to satisfy the most users and grow is to essentially become a centralized platform. And that really kind of, I think, neuters a lot of the potential revolutionary aspects of digital technology.
What about traditional media? I mean, Joe Rogan has an incredibly popular podcast. I'm not sure he wants to be a platform, or maybe just he's become one almost intuitively without even trying. He earns hundreds of millions of dollars by just doing a show. Rupert Murdoch remains very powerful. Can one survive in the digital economy without being a platform? I mean, what do you make of Rogan? How would you explain him in your narrative of platform capitalism?
Yeah, I think Rogan is, look, I think any podcast that essentially would use a platform to grow, right? I mean, I think when you put a podcast out, it kind of gets dispersed out to all the different listening platforms, whatever.
Yeah, but it's not a platform. So
Right,
Rogan's on Spotify,
right.
but it doesn't make him a platform. He's
Oh yeah,
riding on the platforms.
exactly. Yeah, no, he's essentially like a rentier on the platform land, right? He needs these platforms to grow and algorithmically recommend his podcast. But I think what I meant when in terms of a platform is it's a platform in the more 20th century media sense. It's this idea that he can elevate someone to importance and I think actually he does clearly have quite a lot of political clout apparently. Um, and so yeah, so I wouldn't say he's a platform in the new sense. He's actually a powerful mover on the platform. But I mean, in one strictly legal sense, he's just kind of like anyone else who uploads any content to these platforms. He's just kind of renting that. He doesn't own any of these platforms, as far as I know. So it's essentially basically just he has to make do the way the rest of us do in terms of uploading and growing.
And going back to Murdoch, I mean, Murdoch, of course, his model was aggregating newspapers. When I was growing up, and it gives away my age, he was the bad boy. He was the Elon Musk of his age. Now he seems a genial old gent. How does one connect platform capitalism with the media capitalism or the media power of a traditional media mogul like Rupert Murdoch?
Well, yeah, I mean, I can kind of show my age somewhat, but I mean, I remember coming up and reading various different newspapers. It was kind of right when everything was going digital. And even before that, newspapers are just a shitty business. They just don't make money for various reasons, which we can get into. So, this sort of capitalist private equity consolidation drive that he, probably used to sell and grow and become quite wealthy is almost like the precursor to kind of the consolidation we saw around digital media and newspapers, right? I mean, it used to be a time when, I write art criticism, I read cultural criticism. There used to be a time where there was basically a cultural critic of some weight in every major city in the U.S. And over the period that I've been writing, essentially now we're down to about like 4 or 5 full-time, what you'd call art critics. And it's just because it does not pay very well to publish this stuff, or the attention has moved elsewhere. And so, this consolidation of media has been a long time coming. It's essentially revolves around this economic problem of the newspaper. And I think our democracy is worse for it.
But is there any difference between Bezos, who spent $45 billion on X so that he could be a powerful media baron, and Murdoch or Hearst, who spent lots of money promoting their own power? X is a platform, but is it fundamentally different from the Sun newspaper or the New York Post or whatever else Murdoch owns?
Yes, I think every newspaper, for all of its faults and political ideology, is essentially a media institution. I believe that even if you don't agree with Fox News, I think in some case it is essentially part of a pseudo journalistic output. Right? It is clearly in some cases propagandizing a certain perspective. It believes in the idea of journalism. It does pay journalists, right? Like, no matter what you want to say about them. With things like, and so I think clearly there's a the oligarchy, wealthy people who want to peddle influence will have been doing that for ages, right? Owning the kind of means of discourse. I think with X, it's a little bit different. I think the intent is the same. The end product is to essentially be able to put your finger on the scales to own this communication network, this kind of agenda setting platform. But the difference is, there's no underlying belief in journalism or media as a pursuit in and of itself. And I think Musk has literally said this verbatim. We are the media now. And I think there's so many different things kind of baked into that idea. It's this kind of like libertarian idea that we are going to upend the elites who want to dictate or essentially decide, what is news and what is not news. And it's this idea that we can all be sort of citizen journalists. But I think the reality is a lot more darker, right? I think the reality is that I think with things like Grok, the idea is that no one will really care what's true or what's not. It's almost as like whatever is the most viral, whatever is spit out by the Grok model will essentially be news. And what that is, it's very sort of like, anti-institutional, anti-journalism stance. It's thinking that computers can do this much better than any kind of newsroom could be.
Mike, as you know, you're not the first or the last person to write a critique of big tech. The book is called Against Platforms, Surviving Digital Utopia. In fact, you're one of the 3 or 4 authors of new books that I'm dealing with in January and February of this year. Many others have been written. What are you saying that's different? How would you claim some original thinking on your critique of Silicon Valley?
Yeah, no, I know it's been the backlash to Silicon Valley has been going on for a very long time, and I think there has been a lot of good writing on it. I think there's 2 things that differentiate what I'm trying to say in terms of what we should do next and what the future holds. One is I'm trying to explain to people that digital utopia kind of lives a zombie afterlife, even in the critiques of technology. So you'll have a critique that technology has created some negative externality, which we've all read all of these. But then the solution will actually also be digital utopian in itself. And the way this happens is people will say, oh, we just need a better platform. Or what if we just fixed platforms? What if we go to Blue Sky? What if we go to Mastodon? What if we use blockchain? My point, which I think deviates from a lot of the tech criticism, is that think less about using technology to save you from technology and go back to first principles and ask what you really want. The second thing I'd say is, my call at the end of the book is that we think about improving our existing institutions and think about what it means to be an institution. I think the antidote to the platform world is going back and making our institutions more robust. So, when I'm talking to either a younger set or people who are trying to think of the way out of our current malaise, our current situation, it's because I think a lack of robust institutions got us here. And I think thinking back positively about the idea of a cultural institution and what that means, what constitutes that, is potentially our route out of this, rather than doubling down on techno-determinism or this kind of digital utopianism to solve the problems that those things actually created.
So I'm not clear what you mean by a cultural institution being the problem. Could you be a bit more concrete? Give me some examples.
Yeah, well, I think our lack of, if you look at the topic we were just talking about before, the lack of the institution of journalism or strong journalistic institutions is essentially where the platform is able to come in and kind of bleed those things dry, right? I don't think it's clearly there's a relationship between the idea that you could Google something, get something on X, or more recently use AI to summarize an issue, with a slow descent of the business case and the cultural importance of strong journalistic institutions, or just the idea.
But Mike, there are some people be thinking, yeah, that's all very well. Clearly, some areas, especially of local journalism, have been decimated by the digital revolution. But the New York Times is doing extremely well. Jeff Bezos, controversial fellow, but he's nonetheless poured many millions of dollars into the Washington Post. Murdoch's Wall Street Journal is very strong. The Financial Times is doing well. So there are strong journalistic institutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's, for every example.
Sorry to jump in again.
Yep.
Your book got very nicely reviewed in the Rolling Stone, another good example of a very viable magazine, or certainly an online magazine these days.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for every example where you have, pennies on the dollar of these billionaires being put back into what we might have called traditional investments or traditional kind of essentially charitable investments, I think, at this point, because they know they're not going to make money. You have the opposite kind of deinstitutionalizing thinking coming from Silicon Valley, right? So, I mean, I think of Peter Thiel, who basically pays really brilliant kids not to go to college, right? I think of various pieces in the various developments in sort of blockchain art or NFT space, where the predominant attitude is, we don't need cultural institutions. We don't need museums or galleries. We could just sort of go online and let the market be the arbiter of what is important and what we consider art, right? So I think there's multiple counterexamples of this idea of Silicon Valley kind of saying that computation and AI will essentially be the cultural institution of the future. And I think what that's doing is it is quite I think it is a zero sum game with some of the traditional democratic cultural institutions that we've come to rely on.
But Mike, newspapers have often been the playthings of wealthy people, rather like yachts or aeroplanes or beautiful husbands or wives or jewels. Often, even from Hearst, or perhaps even Murdoch, they invested in media for their own self-promotion. Are you looking back at a moment in history? Are you a nostalgist? You keep on talking about the problems with the current situation. Was there a moment in history where things were healthier? Do you look back nostalgically at the past?
No, absolutely not. I think I try to be very careful when I use the word institution. It's a very dirty word, and it's obviously something that is, somewhat retrograde in its connotation. And yes, I think from the beginning of time, the wealthy and the powerful have used cultural institutions to essentially reinforce their worldview. One must always ask when you're critiquing technology, well, what is different? How is this different this time? The difference is that while we have a few sprinkling of techno capital elites basically making investments into the Washington Post, I think the large share of our new elites don't even really believe these things should exist or believe these things will exist. So when you have very objectionable people on the board of major museums, that's obviously a problem. And I think
Who give me an example of an objectionable person on the board of a museum?
Oh, well, I think the example I'm thinking of is Warren Kanders and the Whitney. I think a few years ago there was a big row. I forget how you say it, but there was a big controversy over essentially dirty money being on a museum board. And I, like you, had said, well, look, I mean, that's always been the case, right? Like anyone who's a billionaire and giving their money to culture clearly is going to have some skeletons in their closet, right? And while I think that Warren Kanders, by the way, he made his money from essentially being selling and profiting off of weapons, right? That was essentially the contention, right? And while obviously, and it's not to go back to that sort of idealistic, nostalgic time where it was all these robber barons, funding culture. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the way it's different now is our new elite, the people that sort of should have been creating that, don't even believe that these cultural institutions should exist. In fact, they have I believe, a worldview that is actually antithetical to that idea. They want everything to be a platform. They want you to essentially go on the platform, do the labor, and that's where your culture is from. And so when I say institutions, I do not say we should go back. I'm saying let's think about how we build forward and build what we actually want in a way that is not responding to the whims of elites.
We talk about we. How do you know what everybody else wants?
Yeah, no, well, that's another great point that comes up in the book, right? I mean, certainly I have an ideology. I come from a certain political persuasion. But I think the thing is that I think the one of the virtues of institutions is anyone can build them and anyone can essentially have them create and enact their own political point of view. They have a point of view, right? You have neoliberal institutions, you have conservative institutions, you have liberal ones, and you have very sort of leftist, almost socialist institutions of various stripes, right? Doing all sorts of different things. That's actually something that I believe is going away. I think the platform is kind of mashing that all together. There is no real ability to have an argument or distinguish or really identify with any one of these things. We're all sort of being algorithmically sorted into a kind of mirror world, right? When I look at Substack now, Substack is so funny because there's a lot of great writers on Substack, but they're all just sort of like talking to themselves. It's really kind of, you'll never really run into an interesting person from across the aisle, so to speak, on Substack, because you're not flipping the page. You're essentially just using the platform to subscribe to people who you already kind of are in tune to or would agree with, right? And so what's not there is that shared narrative, that shared culture narrative, that shared stage upon which we actually can debate these ideas. So that's what I mean when I say we, right? I don't think it's about any one specific political ideology. It's about the problem that platforms have, where it just becomes very difficult to have any kind of shared public discourse.
It's a very dark view, Mike. Maybe you're right. You have 13 myths that you expose in the book. One is that technology does not exist outside of capitalism. A couple of questions on that. Firstly, I mean, there is some technology that exists outside capitalism. I don't know, the wheel or fire. I don't think it was capitalism when we humans discovered the wheel or fire. And secondly, are you against capitalism? I mean, isn't that rather childish these days?
No, I'm not. I would say that I believe that capitalism should not be the main driving force in how we organize ourselves politically. I think unchecked capitalism is a problem.
But are you against capitalism itself, the free market? I mean, what's the alternative?
Yeah, I would say I basically believe in a heavily regulated free market. So I would say no, I don't believe in the free market. Not at all. Clearly not.
So what's your model? Denmark, Germany,
yeah,
Soviet Russia?
Yeah, I would say I'm a Bernie Sanders Democrat. Well, he's not really a Democrat, but I'm a Bernie Sanders social democrat.
But coming back to this idea, Mike, of technology does not exist outside of capitalism, isn't that slightly absurd? I mean, we humans create technology. The fire, the wheel, lots of other technological breakthroughs were developed before anyone had even conceived of a market economy.
Right. Well, I mean, of course, so is technology, right? The idea of technology is really only like 200 years old as well, right? I think.
Well, no, it isn't. I mean, what do you mean by technology? You mean
the term technology is a rather young term, right? It's this idea. I think maybe what you're conflating there is different inventions, right? I think that's kind of looking back on history and saying, oh, that was thought of as technology, right? And I think
the gun or fire
right.
or the wheel,
right?
Or even the engine.
Right. Those were tools, right? I think we've always had tools, and I think what I'm trying to get at in that point is current digital technology that is tried to be used for sort of, let's call it, anti-establishment ends or anti-capitalist ends, clearly has a limit to it, right? I think once you start to scale up and actually start to create and have a responsibility to more users using your tool, or if you want to create a sort of platform that is a sort of quote unquote good platform, what I'm trying to show there and point out is you're going to run into, you're sort of not going to be able to escape, right, the laws of the free market. You're not going to be able to escape these things that will actually end up compromising that, right? So it's basically to try to pour cold water on some of this digital utopianism that says we can escape capitalism if we just get technology right, or we can be post-capitalist by way of technology.
So there's an inevitable Luddism, it seems to me, in your argument. You say, beware open access. Decentralization is an illusion. Everything lends itself to platform capitalism. So are you suggesting then ultimately that there's no way out of this and that the only way is to essentially smash the machine?
No, I would say, yeah, I'm not a Luddite at all. Actually, to your question before about what differentiates me from maybe the more traditional tech criticism or the existing tech criticism is I'm actually quite hard on Luddism and Luddites. I think that what we need to do is put forth a more proactive vision of the future that includes technology, right? So I don't want to say give up, drop the machines, smash the machines. What I want to say is take those tools, take these essentially what we'll call technology for now, which I think we both agree on what we're talking about in the present day, and think about how to reorganize and build within institutions rather than, I think, what the history of platform capitalism has shown is where platforms essentially sort of have a zero-sum game where they, like Mark Andreessen said, ate the world, right? What I'm saying is Luddism is actually very dangerous right now because it just means that you almost give up. So I'm very open and calculating about the power of technology. I think the key going forward is actually something of an optimism, right? I think we can take digital tools, but we just have to build them with a sort of basis in this idea of an institution rather than a platform. And that's kind of the tension I deal with in the book.
So I take your point. So we shouldn't fall for new promises of decentralization or blockchain or Web3. But what does this world look like that you're trying to imagine? It's a practical world, but in a world of multi-trillion dollar companies, do you have examples, models where your pro-technology future is beginning to take shape?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I think there's several folks. They're generally tend to be around my generation where they're very good at these tools. They know how to build an app. They know how to code. Although that may not really matter very soon if you believe Sam Altman's hype. And they're trying to say we want to use digital media, but we don't want a venture capital funded Silicon Valley platform that's going to sort of eat us all. I think of the tool Arena, which is essentially like a image sharing kind of discourse platform that you might think of like a social media app. But they haven't taken venture capital. It's used by lots of artists to organize and kind of keep up with different media. I think that's one kind of rather good example of this manifestation. And then I also think about what's happening now with the Discords. I mean, I'm in a few Discord servers, and Discord looks a lot like traditional social media, right? It's sort of a chat app that looks like Slack or something. But it is decentralized to an extent, right? And so what this is creating is, instead of going on Twitter and arguing with a bunch of bots and crazy people and essentially just feeding this giant AI slot machine, on Discord, you can have a smaller group of like-minded people in your community, and you can actually use that as the infrastructure, kind of build your own kind of cultural institution. Or I don't like the word community because that kind of got co-opted by the Web3 people, but build a kind of community, right? And so it's not saying leave platforms. It's saying or leave technology. It's saying think about the rules for whatever end product you want to do and whatever end thing you want to build, and go from there first, rather than being dictated by the technology. Technologies afford themselves.
But as you know, Discord is quite a controversial, and whether it's a platform or technology or product, whatever you want to choose to describe it, lots of controversy about what people do on Discord, planning all sorts of violence. It seems to be a sort of one of the front doors on the dark web. How would you respond to that critique?
Yeah, well, I think clearly there's going to be abuses with anything, and I don't think that again, Discord should not be taken as itself this sort of object that should be held up. I think it's more about it does have some examples of people using these tools in ways that help them build sort of institutions, or sort of help them remove themselves from the sort of larger kind of mainstream internet rat race. I think there's a debate now. The technologist Yancey Strickler and a few other people have talked about this idea of the dark forest web. My friend and critic Carly Busta has also written a lot about this, and it's this idea that people are leaving sort of like the mainstream internet and what they call mainnet, and instead, like a dark forest, they're trying to kind of like retreat into these smaller little eddies and hiding places, so that they can actually escape the larger rat race. And so I think with like dark forest spaces, clearly it's not to hold up the actual tool, because there's always going to be kind of bad actors. It's about that, is there really the ability to build what you want and interact with the web the way you want in these spaces, as opposed to what's kind of happening. I think the more damaging and kind of noisy experience we have on the sort of mainstream platforms.
But Mike, you stress the value of practical behavior, practical initiatives. And yet the way you're talking sounds very, if not idealistic, certainly very marginal. There's clearly a countercultural class like yourself who are rejecting the platforms, who are becoming multi-trillion-dollar businesses with AI. These platforms are going to become wealthier and wealthier. What's practical about what you're presenting as these dark forests? It sounds like the kind of people, perhaps who you associate with, but the hardcore digital literati who might not like the platforms. But for ordinary people, this is unimaginable and uninteresting.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably true. I think to the first part of your question, what are we imagining here? For me, I think I'm trying to convince people that the answer to get out of this is not to essentially double down on building a different, re-engineering a platform slightly differently, right? I'm trying to explain to people, or I'm trying to at least put forth this bug in people's ear, that what we don't want another platform. We actually want what I argue is called, what I term is like the institution, right? We want institutions that will actually allow us to create these communities instead of just sort of trying to build a better platform. That's essentially what I'm saying. I don't offer a specific like how to. My job as a critic is essentially to allow people to see the reality of what's happening and allow people to see the underlying ideologies of the tools that got us here.
Well, some people might say you don't offer a how-to because you can't. We've had a lot of shows recently about AI. Keith Tier, I do a regular weekly show with him. He is the author of the That Was the Week newsletter. He's pro-tech. He believes that progressives need to become what he calls yes people on technology, that you're not a Luddite, but you're very critical of the platforms. I'd also just back from DLD. I had another startup entrepreneur, Richard Socha, one of AI's leading thinkers. He's the founder and CEO of U.com, a kind of AI platform. How would you respond to people like Tier and Socha who say, well, for all this rather abstract critique, we need to move forward, and that technologies like AI actually have the promise of making the world a better place?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's largely marketing for their for their tools and for their products, right? I think it goes with AI. It goes in both ways, right? There's all these AI doomers out there that say that super intelligent AI is going to rise up and kill us all. That's marketing. It's basically to get you to kind of start to fear this and think that it's powerful.
I mean, I've had Gary Marcus on the show. It seems as if he genuinely believes that. It's not just marketing.
Marcus believes that?
Well, he seems to think. I mean, he's an AI skeptic.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think he would say what I'm saying. I think he would say that a lot of these claims are kind of trumped up, and they're actually not as close as they say they are. Right. But I mean, I think with all of this discourse and technology, you have to kind of do a materialist analysis of the person you're talking to. Right. It's like, who is like, why would they say this? What are their incentives to say something about a tool? And it's usually, to my point about technology will never exist outside of capitalism. If you follow the money, it usually has to do with basically someone trying to put forth the idea that their tool is potentially the way out, right? And so I think it's...
Are you suggesting this, what you call a materialist analysis? Are you suggesting that anyone who is involved in technology is enslaved to the interest of that technology and they don't have independent thought? I mean, your career as a product manager and a digital marketer, some people might say you're no different from anyone else.
Yeah, no, I would say I'm not saying that. I think the book is actually written for people that work in tech, right? I think the book is written for well-meaning, really smart people that work for these platforms, and it's trying to say the most important thing is not the tools, the technology. The most important thing is the ideology and the consciousness and the actual personal and political goals of people using these platforms, right? So, one is not compromised by working in this industry by any means. They're a little bit complicit, just like I am, and many of us are. But I think that the answer to where is my optimistic picture, it's that we're only in this situation now because of the political ideologies of the folks that have been building, right? If we change those, we then can change the trajectory of digital technology and what digital technology can serve us rather than kind of us serving it.
That's interesting stuff from Mike Pepi. He has a new book out, Against Platforms, Surviving Digital Utopia. We'll have to get you back on the show, Mike, as the AI platforms unfold. But best of luck with the book and congratulations. It's a very interesting position. Not everyone will agree, but it's certainly provocative. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure.
Can I step on the scene? I'm ready to attack. Andrew King. Yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He is the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew King, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.